Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our NEHP webinar. We have a beautiful day outside, and we're really excited to be spending our lunch today with all of you and with Wendy. So without further ado, we'll get started. So my name is Jessica Simons. I am so happy to be with you here today to facilitate this webinar. A few pieces of business before we get started. Just as a reminder, we have a couple of guests joining us today. So if you enjoy what you hear today and you get a lot out of it, please do consider joining NEHP. All of our webinars are included in your membership, and we would love to have you join. Today's webinar is being sponsored by some of our fabulous corporate sponsors for NEHP. It's being provided to us today by Wilsker and Sorrenti and the Giving Collaborative. So thank you so much to them. So a few housekeeping items. All lines have been muted. Please, if you have questions, utilize the chat feature. This is definitely a webinar where Wendy is hoping for quite a bit of conversation. And we do conversation in webinar setups like this through the chat. So if you have questions or you want her to expand on something, or if you want to be able to provide an experience that you've had, we'll help facilitate that as best we can. We really want to try and make this as interactive as possible, given our limitations. That said, Wendy does start off this presentation with a few questions. So I'll be putting up some polls in just a few minutes. Please take a moment just to answer the poll question, and I think that will help guide the conversation and really allow Wendy to speak to some of the pieces, you know, that some of the information that we're able to provide to her. What else? At the end of the presentation, we will ask everyone, as you click out, you'll be offered the opportunity to provide answer a survey. Please do just take those extra 2 seconds to answer those survey questions. It not only helps our presenters, but then it helps NEHP determine our next webinar and where folks would like us to focus. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Wendy Wilsker, Managing Partner of Boyden, who's really going to walk through moves management for all of our careers. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica. Good afternoon. I appreciate all of you spending time with us today. For me, it is so great to reconnect with my friends at NEHP. Some of my favorite conferences that I have attended have been NEHP conferences. I know there's going to be hopefully a live conference next spring, which will be great to be able to be together again. So I'm really excited to have this opportunity to share some of the things that I've thought about along my career journey, and some of those things that I have been really intentional about and thought about. But one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is that as fundraisers, it is so ingrained in us to be intentional in our outreach with our donors, in each move along the life cycle of our donors. And it occurred to me that those same principles that we utilize for the life cycle of our donors can be adapted to our own careers. And so I know that many of you today are at all different phases of your career. And what I hope the takeaways will be is that at any phase of your career, you can really be applying some of the principles that we'll be talking about. And I would say also for those of you who manage, I think it's not frequent enough that we have those opportunities to talk with the folks who we are managing about their careers and about their career development. And too often, I think that those conversations are taboo. You don't want to put something in a great employee's mind that maybe they should be doing something else, or maybe they should be thinking about their next opportunity. It's wonderful conversations that people can have with themselves, with their supervisors and supervisors to be having with their employees. So as Jessica said, I'm going to have one more slide and then we're going to go into some polls. Please use the chat if there's something that you're thinking about, and a comment and a question after. You know, if only we were all together, this could be so much more of an interactive conversation. So just to, here we go. So just to really think about, you know, for those of us who are frontline fundraisers, you know, we've got the 5 stages of you know, our cultivation of our donors: identification, qualification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. And, you know, very infrequently does a donor come in and all of a sudden we receive a major gift. Every now and again, a bequest comes in from someone who we've never heard of, but more often than not, we are engaging in every single phase of the cultivation cycle. So I want you all to think about these 5 stages. And now let's think about how we can kind of layer the work that we do with our donors with how we're thinking about our careers. So we're going to start with a couple of poll questions. Question number 1, when was the last time you reviewed your donor portfolio? 1 year ago, 6 months ago, last quarter? I review my portfolio every week. Jessica, if you could put the poll up, please.
Just leave it up for another second or two as we continue to receive a few additional responses. Wonderful. So Wendy, 86% reviewed their portfolios last quarter, and 14% look at it every week.
That's great. And so the next question, when was the last time you reviewed your resume? 1 year ago, 6 months ago, last quarter? I only look at my resume when I'm in a job search. Great. Jessica, if you can open the poll.
Oh, excellent. This was really quick. Okay, so 20% 1 year ago, 20% 6 months ago, 20% last quarter, and 40% of us when only in a job search.
That's awesome. Thank you. So I want to pause on this for a little bit. And maybe for the 40% that reviewed their resume in the last 6 months or the last quarter, I wonder pre-COVID what those answers would have been. But, you know, I think that it's so important that as we think about the frequency with which we are reviewing our donor portfolios, the frequency with which we look at our resume. And, you know, I'm pretty, you know, in that camp, I think, over the years with the 40% of you that would only be in a job search. And I would look at my resume, and the last time that I had updated it maybe was when I started a job several years ago. And I forgot, what had I done? How much had we raised at that event? How much of an increase was it from the previous year? How much more participation was it? And so what I want to encourage everyone, just as you're reviewing your donor portfolios every quarter, take a look at your resume. Even if you are loving your job and hope to be there forever, update it while it is still fresh. When you have those updated metrics, when you have those outcomes, perhaps you've added some new responsibilities. Perhaps there's a new staff member who you are supervising. Keeping your resume current serves a couple of values. You know, first, as I said, it ensures that you're not forgetting all the great work that you do, but also you never know when a recruiter is going to call you or you see an opening for your dream job. Be at the ready with it. So let's move on to the next question. How often do you create a multi-year plan for a donor? Almost always with my major donors. Only when I think they will make a major gift? Never. Jessica?
Just give it one more second. If anyone else wants to answer? Excellent. So it looks like we've settled 63% almost always with my major donors, 25% when I think they'll make a major gift, and 13% never.
Thank you. So another conversation we'll talk about, thinking long-term about your donors. But I do think you're always thinking about what's next, right? Who's in your pipeline? What other organizations do they give to? What are they excited about as you get to know them? And you're being really intentional in thinking about how are you engaging those donors? Who are you introducing them to? How are you bringing them closer to your organization? And now the last question, how often do you think about the next step in your career? When I get a new job, I think about what I want to do next. On really bad days, I think about what I want to do next, or only when I'm in a job search.
The poll should be distributing. And I think I can relate to the answers that are being collected. So 11% think about it when they get a new job and what they want to do next. 67% on really bad days, I think about what I want to do next. And then 22% only when I'm in a job search.
Thank you. Many years ago, early in my career, one of my mentors gave me a great piece of advice. And she told me to think about what I want to do in the job after my current job. And I've never forgotten that piece of advice, because even if it is within my own organization, when I think about where do I want my career to go, it has allowed me the opportunity to think about who do I need to be learning from? Who is someone who could be a mentor to me? What are some different skills that I need to be honing in on? What do I need to be learning? And so, for many of us, our careers have not been a straight ladder. Mine certainly has been kind of a long and winding road. But when you think about some things that you want to achieve in your career, that will help you to be forward thinking, to be intentional, and to be less reactive. I think, what I hope one of the takeaways is from our conversation today is that thinking about your career should not be in reaction to a job posting that you see, or in reaction to a really bad day. We all know it's not good to make decisions emotionally, but I do think it's a great exercise, and I think it can create space for you to be thinking about how am I going to continue to learn and grow in my career. So what would happen if we took the same approach to cultivating our donors, to managing our careers? And for the rest of our conversation, I'm going to be walking through each of these 5 stages and how we can really be applying the work that we're doing every day with donors to ourselves. So, identify. One of the things that I did after my 5th year as Director of Institutional Advancement at the Rashi School was to pause for a minute. And I gave myself an opportunity to ask myself some questions. What did I love about my job? I wouldn't say there was anything that I hated about my job, but what were some things that I really didn't love and I didn't really want to be continuing to do? I had spent about 13 years working in the Jewish community, and I asked myself a question: am I a Jewish communal professional fundraiser, or am I a nonprofit fundraiser? And the implication of that answer really guided me to thinking about, if I want to have a long-term career in fundraising, not only in the Jewish community, where should my next job be? Should I remain in the religious sector, or should I perhaps think about another sector? I took the time to ask myself these questions. What am I interested in? What are my personal passions? What are my aspirations? And as I went through these questions in my mind, what I realized was that what I really loved was working with donors and being out there with donors. And I wasn't spending as much time with donors as was reflective in how much I enjoyed that. And as I started thinking about what I wanted to do next, it became really clear to me that I wanted to be a frontline fundraiser more than I wanted to be a manager. At that time, the Rashi School was about to launch its public phase of its capital campaign. My kids were really young. I knew that managing a campaign was going to mean a lot of nights and weekends. And I just knew that that was not what I wanted the next several years of my career to be about. And so I really honed in on answering those questions and decided that I wanted to be a frontline fundraiser. I wanted to work in a different sector. I really felt that it would benefit me to learn about fundraising and philanthropy from a different constituency and a different sector. And answering all of those questions led me to literally answering an ad for a major gift officer at then called Leahy Clinic. That was how I got to meet many of my friends in NEAHP. I went from being a director of institutional advancement at a $5 million organization to a frontline major gift officer at a $50 million organization. I wasn't managing. I wasn't on the organization's leadership team. And sometimes that felt a little bit weird. But I had to remind myself that I had gone through this process of being really intentional in thinking about what I wanted to do and how I wanted to spend my time. And what was fantastic was that I learned about grateful patient philanthropy, which was a really different mindset from the kinds of charitable giving that I had encountered during the past decade working in the Jewish community. I learned best practice in reporting and research and wealth screening because I was in such a larger institution. I was also able to learn from colleagues who had different experiences that I had. And I will say, after a few years, I was promoted. I did find myself back in a management role, and I was managing a team again. But having gone through that process was a really pivotal moment in my career. And I think that going through this process and being really intentional about your career means giving yourself the time and space to be intentional, to pause, and to really ask yourself a bit of soul searching questions. So once you've gone through this identification process, the next step in our moves management phase is qualifying. And I want to start by encouraging you to talk with your boss about your growth opportunities, about identifying what are those things that you want to be doing. Are there opportunities for you to be doing some more or different things within your organization? I'll share an example from something that happened with me when I was Chief Advancement Officer at Jewish Family and Children's Service. I had an employee who was our annual giving officer, and she was working part-time. And we had someone in Foundation Relations who had just left. And my colleague Nancy came into my office and she said, I have a crazy idea. I don't know what you're going to say, but I want to share this idea. And I said, yeah, of course. She shared that she loved the writing that she was doing. She was really interested in learning more about Foundation Relations and in doing grant writing. She was ready to go back to work full time. And so could we create a hybrid role for her? And so we created the position, Senior Development Officer, Annual Giving, and Foundation Relations. Now that position does not exist anywhere else. But here she was sharing with me that she had gone through this process of identifying what did she really enjoy doing? What did she want to learn more about? I know that it was probably pretty scary for her to come into my office and to say, I want to be doing something different. But if she hadn't asked, maybe I would have lost her on my team. She would not have had that opportunity. And we recently did a reorg, and now she's doing foundation relations full time. So when you go through this process, don't think that you have to leave your current job to be doing something different. I also want to encourage you to think about identifying those professionals who are doing the job that perhaps you're interested in. Organizations like NEHP, Women in Development of Greater Boston, Association of Fundraising Professionals are all organizations where you can find incredible colleagues that are doing all different kinds of work. I would encourage you to reach out to someone to talk with them about what's the reality. I know that I did when I was thinking about being a major gift officer. I hadn't worked in an organization where there were rigorous metrics, where there were those bottom line expectations. And so I took the time to really understand what was the role of a frontline major gift officer in a large organization where there were metrics, where there were different kinds of expectations, where there were weekly activity reports. It was so valuable because that did qualify for me that yes, I did want to this different direction in my career. One of the interesting things that I have found in working in different sectors is that there is not just different cultures, but really a different pace. And I think very oftentimes we put ourselves in boxes. I work in healthcare, I work in higher education, I work in social services. But the work that we're doing with our donors really transcends what those different boxes are of the work of fundraising. But there's a difference in the urgency of philanthropic support. There's a difference in the reliance on philanthropy for payroll, for making the annual budget. And I think it's really important as hiring managers and job seekers to qualify what is culture and what is pace, and to really qualify for yourself. What kind of fundraiser are you? I recently read an article on LinkedIn that someone shared, and they said there's two different types of fundraisers. One is a hunter and one is a farmer. The hunter goes out there and loves the chase and is just always getting out there, has to be out in the field looking for donors, hunting them down, bringing them in. The farmer sows the field, plants the seed, is patient, waters every day, watches the seedlings grow. You get to the same end game, but it is a different personality of the hunter and the farmer. It's perhaps a different necessity of letting the garden grow or bringing in, the meat to cook dinner. And I think it's important to qualify for yourself. Are you a hunter or a farmer? And for hiring managers to understand what is the pace of their organization. I didn't do that when I hired a fundraiser at one of my jobs, and someone was coming from an incredible large nonprofit. They had closed many seven-figure gifts. They were a great fundraiser, but they were a little bit more of the farmer. They wanted to do all of their research before they called a donor. They wanted to know everything they could about the donor. They were moving slowly. The culture and the pace at the organization where we were at was moving very quickly. Donors had not been cultivated. There weren't relationships. We needed to be out there aggressively, getting to know donors, securing current gifts, planting the seeds for future gifts. And I didn't take that time to really think about what is the pace. So understand the difference in changing the sectors and qualify for yourself. What is that pace of your organization, and what is your own pace? The last thing on this that I want to talk about is, integrating work and family. And over the past year, we've all been at home, so we've been forced to integrate our work and family life. But one of the things that I've recently been thinking about is this acronym WIN, and it stands for What's Important Now. I learned this a couple of years ago. My son was a goalie on his high school hockey team. He had a challenging season. It was challenging for me as well as for him. And his goalie coach told him to write win on his goalie pads. And it meant focus on the now. Don't look behind, don't look ahead. And a good friend of mine was recently deciding between two jobs that she was a finalist for. They were both great jobs. And I asked her, what's important now? What's important today is different than what was important to you in your career 5 or 10 years ago, and what will be important in 5 or 10 years. And as you're making decisions about your career, you have to really figure out what's important now. As I shared when I was making the decision to leave the Rashi school, my kids were young. I wanted to work 4 days a week. I wanted to have some more time with them. I did not want to have to work weekends. That's really different from the stage in my life where I am today, where I'm practically an empty nester, and I have different family obligations. But in the conversation that I had with a friend of mine, one job would have been about an hour and a half each way commute, and the other maybe about 20 to 30 minutes. And her son was in high school, doesn't have his driver's license. And when she really thought what was important right now at this moment in her career, it was having that access to be available to her son. And so all of these things, wherever you're at in your life and your career, it's so important to pause and ask what's important now. So I want to talk about cultivation, because I think for all of us who have been frontline fundraisers, right, this is the best part of the work that we do. As we are getting to know our donors, understanding what they're passionate about, building the relationships, connecting them with physicians, educators, researchers, connecting them as volunteers, engaging them on committees for events or advisory councils. This is the fun stuff. And this should be the fun stuff as we cultivate our own networks, as we cultivate our career. Those of you who have been members at NEHP for a long time, I know how much you value each other and the friendships that you've made. For those of you who are new, I will say once again, the NEHP conference is a blast. And there's so many people who I met through my time in healthcare philanthropy whose friendship I value so much. Broaden your network, whatever organization it is. Get to know folks who are in the same jobs as you and who are in jobs that perhaps you wish to be in. When I was at Leahy, I was promoted to Director of Major Gifts. And every 6 months, I would get together with my counterpart at Boston Medical Center. And we would share the challenges that we were each facing. We would lament what was a challenge for me was not a challenge for her, and we would just share. And I think in the field of development, there's an incredible generosity, an incredible camaraderie. So I encourage you to create a network, create a hive. Over the years, I have a group of people who are my trusted advisors. If I have a challenge, if I'm thinking about hiring someone, there's about 6 people who I will always connect with. And it's been so valuable for me to cultivate those relationships, to check in, to keep on asking them those questions. We become invaluable to each other. I become super active on LinkedIn. I encourage all of you, please follow me on LinkedIn. There are so many people who I am following, organizations that I am following. I am, I think, becoming more well-rounded. I'm learning so much about every different sector. I'm thinking about things that maybe I hadn't thought about. And I will say that LinkedIn is just an incredible resource for learning and for increasing your network. You're all here today, and hopefully we're going to be able to be together live really soon. But I think cultivating our careers is about getting out from the 4 walls, wherever those 4 walls are, getting off of those endless Zoom calls, and really doing that important networking, that important professional development. I want to talk a little bit about cultivating our professional mental health. It's been a really hard year. For those of you who've been working in hospitals, I can't even imagine the challenges emotionally that you have been facing. I know the past year working at Jewish Family and Children's Service, where we saw so much increased need, and I felt that pressure of bringing in as much money as possible was really taxing. And so I think it's really important that we take that time to nourish ourselves emotionally and personally, but also to nourish ourselves professionally. And I've shared a few of my favorite books. Um, I'll share a little bit about the experience that I had last fall when I was approached by my dear friend and colleague, Lisa Bona, to join her in opening the Boston office of Boyden. And so she reached out to me, and it was a great opportunity. And I had been wanting to go back into search for a little bit of time. And at the same time, I heard about Shonda Rhimes' Year of Yes book. I am a Peloton rider. Don't get me started. The Peloton was launching their Year of Yes series. And in reading the book and in participating in the Year of Yes program, it put me in a mindset where I was ready to say yes to a new opportunity, where every week the instructors were talking about a different thing to think about: the power of being your own CEO, the power of saying no, unlocking the potential of the unknown. Every week, the workouts that I had, the motivation, the things that I was thinking about, reading the different chapters in Shonda Rhimes' book got me to a place of saying, yes, I can take this very scary risk. Yes, I can walk into the unknown. It empowered me. It motivated me. It was different than other books that I had read. And so I share with you and encourage you along the way as you are cultivating your own growth. It can't all come from within. And there are extraordinary leaders who are writing really incredible books. I hope that everyone has read Tipping Points. I think it's pivotal for fundraisers. I think it should be required reading for boards. And the last book that I'm just going to really encourage everyone to read is a book called Work Inspired by Aaron Ain. Some of you in Boston might know Aaron. He's an incredible leader in the Jewish community, CEO of UKJ, Kronos, formerly known as Kronos. And he's just an incredible leader. And his book is all about leadership and all about working in an inspired way. I have found a few podcasts that I love. I follow Shanna Hawking. She is one of the vice presidents of development at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She has a podcast called One Bold Move a Day. It is 6 minutes long. She also has a blog. She's brilliant. It's bite-sized nuggets that are empowering and motivating and inspiring. And I'm also loving the Development Debrief with Catherine Van Sickle. We are about to launch a podcast series called Breakfast with Boyden. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, you will have access to that, and I hope will inspire you as well. But really what I want to say in terms of cultivating, right, is that as we are providing enriching experiences for our donors, create those enriching experiences for yourself, to grow your network, to be inspired and motivated. So, we're asking all the time. As fundraisers, we're asking our board members to make introductions. We are asking our CEOs and other members of our senior staff to join us on solicitations. And of course, we're asking donors for their generous philanthropy. Asking for yourself sometimes is hard, right? We're so used to asking on behalf of organizations. But what I really want to encourage you is to give yourself permission to ask someone who you value and trust, someone who's in your network, ask for input on your resume. If you're thinking about switching sectors, find someone who's been working for a while in that sector. Ask for their input and their advice. I've talked about having a mentor. I have been so blessed to have wonderful mentors. When I started in my role as Chief Advancement Officer of Jewish Family and Children's Services, many of my board members were also on the board at BI Leahy Health. and encouraged me to reach out to Chris Lapping. And I called Chris and I asked her to be my mentor. And she kindly agreed. We didn't have any formal roadmap. It wasn't a formal program. But any time that I had a question or I needed advice, I reached out to Chris and she responded within 24 hours. As I said before, I think there's an incredible generosity and collegiality and supportiveness in this field. Find yourself a mentor, someone who you admire and respect, whose opinion you will trust and value, someone who you know when you ask a question, they're going to keep that question confidential and they will have your back. When you're at that point that you're thinking about, you know what, maybe there isn't more growth within my organization and I have to look elsewhere, think about where's your dream job and find someone in that organization. Ask if they're going to be hiring. You never know. Not every job is posted. But I would really kind of think about, do you have a dream job? And how can you really think about what might be a pathway to work in that dream job? I would also say to review job postings, even if you're so happy in a job, because you just never know. And I will say, always answer a recruiter's call. I'm not just saying from me or from Boyden, but from anyone, because you just don't know. I can't tell you how many times we spoke to folks who said, I'm really happy in my job, but I'll take a listen. And I would also ask that recruiter's advice and input. If you know folks who work in executive search firms and you want input and advice on your resume or some advice on thinking about something, doing something different in your career, reach out, ask the question. I think a lot of this is giving ourselves permission to do work on behalf of ourselves when we've been so accustomed to doing work on behalf of our donors and our organizations. And lastly, I want to talk a little bit about stewardship, because stewardship, again, as part of cultivation, is some of that work that comes really naturally in our work as fundraisers. But just as we steward our donors, steward the relationships that you have formed. A few people have commented to me recently that I'm really good at maintaining relationships. And they asked me, how do you do it? And, you know, nothing that I'm saying is rocket science. It's being really intentional. When I had a commute, which was either 40 minutes or an hour of 40 minutes, I would get into my car and I would think, who haven't I spoken to for a while? Or I would kind of go through my personal contacts, my professional contacts, and I would just, you know, call and say, hey, how you doing? I've been thinking of you. Sometimes I've been a little bit more intentional and I have put something in my calendar or I have blocked time to do some catching up. If someone has given you some great career advice, follow up with them. People really do care. They want to know what you're doing, how you're doing. I was invited to be part of a group of women leaders. We meet every 6 weeks. It is so much fun. We have Vegas rules, so we can put anything out there and it's not repeated. And it's been a great way to steward our friendship and to steward our relationships. My director of corporate and foundation relations at JF&CS put together a group of about a half dozen to a dozen other directors of CNF, all throughout different sectors, and they met regularly. I'm part of a roundtable that meets quarterly. It's not hard to create a group if one doesn't exist already, and when you create a group that meets regularly, you are able to steward those relationships. And I would also, don't just read someone's LinkedIn post, comment on it. Steward those relationships. As you're thinking about stewarding your donors, think about stewarding your network. So I want to take a moment for me to stop talking and for you to all pause and think for a moment of these steps that I have talked about and these thoughts and ideas that I've shared. Think for a moment of what you can try, of what really has resonated with you. Perhaps something that you haven't thought about before. Perhaps something that feels really easy or something that seems really hard. And take a moment And then we're going to, and I hope that also take a moment and put some things in chat, comments or questions. And so, Gail, I know that you have access to the chat box, and really happy to spend some time, again, answering questions or engaging in whatever conversation might be in the chat room.
We don't have anything yet, Wendy, but give everybody a second. Maybe they're furiously typing and we just don't see it yet. We still don't have any takers.
Okay.
Everyone's too quiet today.
Well, I was going to say, Gail, you and I kind of brainstormed this, and I know it's been a little bit of time since we, had talked a few weeks ago, and I know a lot of these things have been percolating in my mind, and wondering, if anything that we had spoken about is kind of, stuck in your mind and resonated.
Well, I have to say, one of the things I thought was really easy to start doing was paying attention to the natural networking groups. You mentioned LinkedIn, and I had not been on LinkedIn in forever. LinkedIn was just a tool for me when I was thinking of like having a bad day, thinking about moving on. And I've definitely participated a lot more in LinkedIn, which is wonderful because it's connecting with people from from my whole work life, from the inception of it. So I thought that was really cool. It's interesting because the way that you've set this up is helpful for both our careers, but also helpful for us remembering what we're doing with our donors. So I really liked that aspect of the way you framed it, and that it's okay. We're not being disloyal to our current employer when we're just thinking about ourselves and our next steps and making sure that we're happy. I think that we have to give ourselves permission to do that. And I've been thinking about that a lot as well.
It wasn't the first time that I heard it, but in the past few weeks, I've been in conversations with people a few times where they've talked about the stay conversation, STAY. And I think it's really scary to present that to your boss. I think as employers, it's really scary too, right? Because you don't want to put in someone's mind. But I have to say that over the years, I remember about a year or so ago, there was a job that looked great for someone on my team, and I did not want to lose her. And I said, please don't apply for this job. And what can I do to make sure that you don't apply for this job? The stay conversations are real. And, the other thing that there's two things that are kind of trending. Right now, I'm reading a lot about the Great Resignation. It has been a hard year. People are exhausted. People are ready for something new. And on the flip side of it, many organizations that had hiring freezes are starting to open up again. Every nonprofit is looking at the urgency of philanthropic support. If campaigns were put on hold, they are being launched. If campaigns were close to hitting a goal and they had a great fundraising year, they're increasing that goal, right? And I think the question, that we all have is, what do we do to prevent the turnover that is so synonymous, right, with development, and what are those retention strategies. And I think the stay conversation, as scary as it is really important. And as managers, I think really important to have on a quarterly basis, not just at that one time of year during a professional review. And I think it's also really important to be able to express to your boss, gosh, it's been really hard. I want to feel refreshed. You know, here are some things that I'm thinking about, right? Because I think as scary as it is, no one wants to lose a great fundraiser. So the stay conversations, I think we're going to be hearing a bit more about.
I think that's excellent. Still no chatters.
Okay, well, I can't wait to see everyone in the spring at the NEHP conference over a glass of wine. I will look forward to reconnecting with friends, meeting new friends, and it's always in a fabulous location. I don't know if you guys have secured where it was, but the only time I've ever stayed at Chatham Bars Inn was at an NEHP conference. So
well, this is Water's Edge in Connecticut, so just as fabulous.
That's great. So I'll just kind of end by saying, you know, please follow me on LinkedIn, visit our website. I do want to say that as we are building our business, we're eager to partner with organizations looking at growing their teams, and I'm really interested in being part of people's career journeys. And so as you know, many of you are thinking about staying or what's next in your career, please reach out. I'd love to have those conversations as we're building our business and opportunities come about. I want to know who might be some great candidates for these searches. So please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wendy, for sharing your expertise with us. And we do look forward to all being together again very, very soon. Thank you all for participating in the webinar. And when we close out, there will be a survey. So please take a couple moments to participate in that survey. It really helps us with our future events. And a recording of this webinar will be emailed to you tomorrow. So feel free to share it with your colleagues. Thank you again for your attention, and thank you so much, Wendy, and everyone. Still be well and safe and have a wonderful summer if we don't see you next month for our next webinar.
Thank you so much for having me.